Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now I will still say this phone is still perfectly fine. I think it's still worth buying for sure. If you want to buy this phone or some other phones, I would recommend this here. Links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of the specific phone, the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 has a beautiful 6.7-inch Super AMOLED Plus display on the front. It's a 1080p panel, but it's still a very good panel in my opinion, and I think, Samsung did a pretty good job with this specific, panel. The only disadvantage is there's no 120Hz. I feel like this phone could have easily supported it, but unfortunately back then in 2020 when this phone came out, Samsung was in this really weird phase. This was actually one of the last Note phones, this and the Note 20 Ultra, were the last Samsung Galaxy Note devices that Samsung ever made, and honestly that was a very sad thing, and I feel like Samsung knew that, and that's why they did such a great job with the Note 20 Ultra. But with the Note 20, I think they just made this phone to make people upgrade to the Note 20 Ultra in my opinion. So the front still looks pretty good, there's not too much to complain about. It's a whole punch display. It's not 1440p, no 120Hz, but it still looks like a good panel overall. Now, this phone still has tons of features built in, which is nice. You have the USB-C port on this thing on the bottom, which doubles with Samsung DeX. So you get that like desktop-like experience with this phone, which is really nice. You have the S Pen with this, specific device as well, which is supposed to be like that stylus, so I think that's a really cool thing this phone has going for it. And that in and of itself is another feature that a majority of phones don't have nowadays, but this specific phone does. So I think that's actually a really cool thing going for this phone, for that moment. Now on the back, we do have a very, very weird thing that Samsung did at this moment again, which is putting a plastic back on this phone. I still don't know why Samsung went down this route for so many other Samsung devices. They did this with the Samsung Galaxy S21, they did this with some of the other phones. I don't know why they did this, especially with their Note lineup. It was kind of known as being like their kind of flagship tier device, and they did some really weird decisions, and they made some really weird decisions with that phone. So in terms of the back, I think Samsung could have done better. I think we all know this, but since then they've, removed this lineup, and actually their phones have gotten a little more premium now, which is nice. We have the triple camera setup on the back as well. We have wireless charging and reverse wireless charging on this phone too, which is another really cool thing. So you could easily go ahead and still say that this phone is still a very premium, flagship kind of feeling phone for the most part. And I think that's a really cool thing going for this phone. If you really wanted to, you could easily go ahead and pretty much still use this phone in terms of the hardware and everything. Is it perfect? No. You still have that plastic back. You still have some other things like that, which can be a little annoying, but I don't think it's a big deal. And personally, if you're still using a phone like this, I think you're in a really, really good situation for the most part as well. So in terms of that kind of covers it up on the outside. Now in the camera department, this specific phone does have a pretty decent camera setup for the most part. It has a 12 megapixel wide angle lens, 64 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor. Now personally, for the last few years, how well this camera has been holding up, I think it's been holding up fairly decently well. It's going to be turning 3 years old this year, and definitely I think Samsung did the most they could. They didn't do the most they could do, but they did a pretty good job when compared to what they did with the Note 20 Ultra. So this phone on the back, it can do 4K 60, it can do 4K 60 on the front with that 10 megapixel wide angle camera, but the crazy thing is it can actually shoot 8K videos on the back of these sensors as well. So that is another really cool thing that we have going for this phone. The fact that we can easily go ahead and just use, 8K capability on this specific phone is wild. There are still tons of phones that cannot support this type of feature, including the iPhones and the Google Pixels. So those are some really cool things that we have going for this type of phone. So if you actually wanted to, you could make the argument that this phone can actually perform a little bit better in some ways than maybe even the Pixel 7 and 7 Pro. Again, that's going to be completely subjective since the camera quality is going to be all over the place. But I will say this camera is still very good. When I was using this phone, it still performed fairly well. I never used it as my main device, but as I used it and compared it to many other phones, I think Samsung did a really good job with this device. Again, it's not perfect, but I think it gets the job done for the most part. And that's really all there's needs to be said about this specific phone in the camera department. Now, in the software and the longevity portion, this is one of the weirder areas of this phone. So as of right now, this phone, I'm not too sure if it's going to be getting the next version of Android or not. So it did end up getting One UI 5. I have only gotten One UI 5 still to this day on my Samsung Galaxy S22. I have not received it on any other of my phones yet, which is very weird. I'm not too sure why Samsung has done this, so hopefully they can fix it. But with this type of phone, you are still in a really good you're in a really good spot because it just got the latest version of Android. Unfortunately for a lot of people, Android 14, the betas are about to come out, which means the official release of Android 14 is not going to be too far off, meaning basically that this phone has the potential of being unsupported or being kind of an older lasting phone and may not be getting the next couple versions of Android. So this is going to be kind of a disadvantage for the Galaxy Note 20. I think this phone, again, could have easily supported 5 or 10 more versions of Android on top of this, but the Galaxy S10 just recently kind of got discontinued. So this thing is kind of in the back end as well. Like, it's not going to be severely discontinued, but again, it is one of those things that you kind of have to keep in mind in the back of your head. So personally, I think this phone could have easily gotten, again, many more versions of Android on top of it. We still kind of have to wait to see what Samsung's doing. It may get One UI 6, I don't know, but this phone is not going to be lasting like another 2 or 3 years. So if you wanted a longer lasting phone, you may want to go up to something like the Galaxy S21 or the S22. The S23 is about to come out, so you may want to wait for that, but that's essentially all we have for the, kind of the longevity side. Now on the performance side, this phone has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside with 8GB of RAM. Now I will say that 865 chipset is still kind of decent. It's definitely not outperforming the 8 Gen Plus 1 chipset, wherever the one that Qualcomm just made, but I think this is still a pretty good chipset for the most part, and that's still a good amount of RAM to have in a phone like this. I mean, you look at the Galaxy S22, and I think the Galaxy S23 is still going to be having, 8GB of RAM. So it's not like you're missing out on too much. It is kind of like the older style of RAM, but it doesn't really matter all that much. Now, I still think this phone could easily support and do everything you'd ever want on a phone like this. I mean, if you're wanting to go ahead and play, heavy intensive games, if you wanted to take it up a notch and do something more intensive, well, you have that opportunity here. So you're not really, again, missing out on a crazy amount if you're wanting to keep this phone as a basic performing phone, or if you want to take it up a notch and play those heavy intensive games. In fact, I think this chipset is the same as the S20 FE, and I've done a lot of gaming on the S20 FE. I've seen a lot of people end up using the S20 FE and even the Note 20, and they actually went ahead and, would set it up with a desktop, monitor, and they would actually be able to game on a desktop monitor like that with Samsung tags. So it's a really cool thing. I love watching videos like that, and most of the time they are using phones like a Note 20 or an S20 FE or S20 even, those cheaper older phones, because they're such good deals and they still have a pretty powerful chipset inside. So I think from the performance side, you're not going to be missing out on too much. Again, I think the lack of 120Hz makes things look and perform a little bit slower, but regardless, I still think it's a pretty good performing phone for the most part. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. And the battery lifestyle, this thing has a 4300 mAh battery inside of it, which is actually a pretty respectable battery size. I don't think that's a small size battery at all. That is a really good size battery for a phone like this. And again, I think, that in of itself is a really cool thing. It also has a reverse wireless charging like I mentioned before, so it does have a lot of cool flagship features that a lot of phones still don't have in this day and age. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video and to wrap things up, I think the Note 20 is still a very good phone for sure. Although it isn't like the most perfect phone or most well-rounded phone, I think it's a good phone for the most part, especially if you're already using it. If you want to buy it, I would say go for it, but this thing is, going to be a little bit of a interesting device for the most part, because it's not the most, expensive, premium feeling phone of all time. It has a plastic back, no 120Hz panel, and it's not going to be lasting that long in terms of software. So there's always little things like that kind of make this phone not the best deal. I would recommend buying a Note 20 Ultra if you want to, but this phone, I think if you can, go for the Pixel 6 Pro, the Pixel 7 Pro, the Note 20 Ultra, the S21 Ultra, things like that may be a better deal. But in terms of that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.